Good morning and most welcome to Heidegger 1389. It's still some snow left here in Gothenburg, degrees around 0, rather greyish sky. Spring seems to be far away still. I will continue today with the article by Emrén. Friend and physicist. Cat, retrocausality and emotion. Still looking for a link, but I will post this as soon as it comes up, so you can follow in the reading. I will have a prolonged commentary because this text is very dense. Actually, it covers all of quantum mechanics. And I will compare with constructor theory as of David Deutsch and Chiara Marletto. And I was at second paragraph of page 6 in the article. Still need some light, see, even if it's 9 o'clock. And the last thing I mentioned was wishes, emotions. Our attitude, if you like, how we feel about things. I given that tendency or aspect many names. Future, after the collapse, something interesting to be discussed is that could be that classical physics where they're putting down personal experience opens up for negative thinking. This is a great problem, I would say, with classical physics. We do not take care of our emotions, our attitudes, thinking them having nothing to do with the stern, immovable, physical reality. We become fleeting amoebas in an ocean of static, in a way, predetermined objects. lost at sea. Many philosophers and scientists have pointed this out. The late Steven Weinberg often mentioned this. We are just dust in the vast universe. And what we think or feel has no influence whatsoever on the universe. One could say quantum mechanics is in this case the absolute opposite. What you feel or what you decide to feel is the most important factor of all. It decides how the superposition will collapse. Not acknowledging your participatory role in the universe will rid you of knowledge of the universe. But your participation is a movement, a verb, not a static thing, essence. With that in mind, I will start the text of Emrén, third paragraph on page 6. It has been reported that wishes by persons have been able to influence the outcome of random events. One also can see that fatalities of accidents often are far less than one would statistically expect. A well-known example is the September 11th, 2001 terror attack. although 4 planes were crashed and both towers collapsed, only about 3,400 persons were killed. One would have expected 7,000 to 12,000 casualties. And the doomed flights had cabin occupation far below the expected 35, 25, 23 and 16% respectively. Just have to comment that those are almost empty flights. One has to remember that it was a weekday, Tuesday, and morning flights. Such flights normally are quite crowded with cabin occupation of 80% or more. Here, 6 mutually independent events caused the low number. This could be pure chance, but the probability is far less than 1 per million. for some reason, people were not where they normally would have been. And people in the North Tower emotionally distrusted the announcement on the loudspeakers that there was no danger and that all work should continue as usual in that building. So their emotions caused them to evacuate. Furthermore, passengers tended to avoid the doomed flights. Some even through trivial misunderstandings. People's imagined and wished futures might have influenced their choice. A dead person cannot go for vacation next week. Well, to put it bluntly, is my comment. Was this influenced by the quantum choice of alternatives? Is it an example of retrocausality? have a table here that could be interesting to have a look at. Maybe, Kalle, you can put some focus on that table.
Yes, it's clear now.
You can here see the deviation from the expectations, and they are massive. To this day, it doesn't have any explanation whatsoever. Buildings are far from occupied with their usual percentage. I will just make one example for the United Airlines 175. Expected fatalities was 174. Real fatalities was 51. There are massive deviations. Tunneling among synapses. Walker has made attempts at using theories of quantum tunneling among synapses in the brain to find the frequency by which emotions and wishes are able to influence the outcome of the wave function collapse. The results appear to an order of magnitude to be similar to those found in studies in which subjects have tried to tell the outcome of random events. From a biblical point of view, this is evident. An example is given by Jesus. Mark 11:23-24. In saying that if we let our wishes be known to God and believe that He will grant them, this will happen. My comment here is that this is very aptly put, very much to the point. Even if you are not of faith, this is clearly what is happening in the collapse. My own personal experience weakly indicates that to be correct. Decades ago, my wife had a disease then unknown, sometimes causing severe pain in her stomach. To comfort her, I used to keep hugging her for extended times. I could feel some kind of power leaving through my hands. I did not move meanwhile. And not say any words aloud. Nevertheless, she asked, "Did you pray?" I felt power enter me, and the pain disappeared. On the other hand, it could have been imagination and coincidence only. When she had an incurable cancer in 2012, I never had the feeling that I should pray for her healing. And she died a few months after the diagnosis. Collapse and miracles. It is generally assumed that quantum mechanics may be used to describe microscopic systems. Whilst macroscopic ones are almost perfectly described by classical physics. This is wrong. My comment there is, this is what we've been indicating throughout the whole span of the lecture series. And also why this idea is so widespread. whenever a phenomenon is highly non-linear, quantum mechanical uncertainties may have major impacts on the outcomes. This is the case with earthquakes and hurricanes. According to Walker, even such a simple device as a dice has to be treated by quantum mechanics. If it bounces some 50 times, the outcome is totally independent of initial conditions. My comment here. Here I recommend you compare with the idea of initial conditions or initial values in the universe. Could be a helping parallel to understand. With very few exceptions, quantum mechanical wave functions have regions of high probability amplitude. But also regions with very low amplitudes. Usually, my comment here, classical physics is very close to the high amplitude quantum mechanical wave functions. Very high, but not identical. And especially on the microscopic level, the deviation is 100%. in my own words, one could say that classical physics are particularly pointing to those instances of high probability, while pushing the low probability way back until it almost disappears. Sometimes this is given names. It's not very uncommon to say that statistically the low amplitude disappears. Which is statistically true, but not true from a physical standpoint. I also often hear the concept of decoherence being used here, or as I would say, misused. It puts a blank into the understanding of the observer's participation that we actually know about. From the viewpoint of constructor theory, there's a third aspect added. And that is our conceptual ignorance of what doesn't happen. Why were there not more fatalities in the Twin Tower terror attack that fatal day in September? From a classical viewpoint, that is a no question. They would say it did not happen that way, and what makes up reality is what actually happens. Real events. factual happenings, real atoms, if you like. That persistent perception, I would say, is the reason why this incredible table has been ignored. We assume that real events are caused by real happenings. It becomes a lullaby that puts our thinking to sleep and make us ignorant of what could have happened. Far worse, I would say, we also explain the before in real events that happened afterwards. That is a cultural trait in our Western thinking. But it is a faulty thinking. You cannot ever understand what happened in terms of what happened. Because such a proposal will always be true. In my viewpoint, this way of making conclusion is coming from the syllogism. It proves what itself is saying. It's an incredibly easy trap to fall into. And I would say that even our language, the Western languages, are formed by this perception. To make explanations, so to speak, a posteriori. And if you start with after the fact, after the collapse of the wave function, the observer's participatory influence will disappear. This is for getting the why question. We will have only beings, real events after the happening to use as building blocks of making a reality. We end up with a map of sorts that we put into our emotion, our expectations. And since it is our expectation, it will be proven by what happens, and classical physics gets a confirmation. But as Emrén writes, we know this is wrong. It is scientifically proven to be wrong. And science itself has fallen into this thinking trap. I can add a personal story myself. Although not as emotionally laden as Emrén's. When I studied electronics as an engineer student, I first encountered imaginary numbers. The root of -1. For us, all students, it was an absolute mystery how the root of -1 could so accurately help us in are calculations which gave a correct result. Imaginary numbers, you know, are unreal in all aspects. They are absolutely impossible to fathom and impossible to produce. But they have a decisive role to play in our understanding all the still. Emrén is describing this very, very clearly, to the point. And with this example from the horrible attack, we get some flesh to understand. I did ask my professor, why do we use them if they're unreal? And he said something similar to the Copenhagen interpretation. Just use them. His variety of the famous shut up and calculate. I think that is what we humans do when we encounter the horror vacui, the apeiron. Our thinking habits makes us biased towards existence. It has long been, for millennia, the true money in the bank. The monetized way of understanding reality. Maybe some comments here from my dear colleague. Just leave over the microphone here.
Good morning. Good morning. So, I have been in contact with Alan Emrén, and I got some feedback from him according to regarding the famous cat. And Alan writes to me, "What killed the cat is not your observation. It was killed by the poison. And this happened independently of you opening the box or not. You force the universe to choose one of the numerous realities that already exist. You only observe what has already happened. my comment is challenging to go to challenge Alan, but countersely, I would say that what killed the cat is both the observation and the poison. But okay, if you prefer that the cat was only killed by the poison, then what is the point with the observation? Is my comment. I would like to repeat because it's so important. So Alan says, what killed the cat, if you find it dead, is not your observation. It was killed by the poison, and this happened independently of you opening the box or not. You force the universe to choose one of the numerous realities that already exist. You only observe what was already happened. My second objection is that it almost gives impression of determinism, so your observation is only passive in one way. Your observation is passive, so you open the box, your observer doesn't have any effect. So I think all of us have the cake and eat it up. So on the one hand, he wants the observation, but for Alan, the observer doesn't really have any effect because the decision is taken independently of the observation, that is of the universe, whatever he means by the universe. I don't know. So I repeat, this is so important. You force the universe to choose one of the numerous realities that already exist. You only observe what has already happened. So it's easy that you fall in the trap of determinism. That is, you already observe. Your observation doesn't hear it. Okay, you need the observer on the one hand, according to Alan, but the observation doesn't really influence it. But in this paper by Alan that we read, okay, if you pray or you can in some weak way, so that is actually Alan's additive weak way influence the outcome. So Alan to me seems to sit on two chairs perhaps. So the observation could have some influence in a weak way. But this is of course very difficult issue, so I want to have Hans' feedback on my comment.
Thank you very much, Kalle, and this shows how complex this thing is. First, a little comment about weak. He did not exactly write it was a weak influence, but it was a weak indication of influence, potentially being able to be proved strongly. It was his feeling that there was a connection that was weak, but the connection could still be very strong. My personal view is that the connection is very strong. It is all important even, absolutely decisive. But be aware we are trampling into a marshland. It's so easy, as Kalle said, to fall into the trap of things already established. I feel being a boatsman, steering between Scylla and Arubdis, it is very, very hard not to go into the either or the other. And sometimes it's even that devilish, the way to express oneself could have ambiguous, almost impossible to discern different understandings. And as I said earlier, classical mechanics always pinpoint more the high amplitude probability quantum wave, and this is ingrained in our language. It's a decisive part of communicating with other people, especially in our Western languages. They will always ask you, you fell on the ice, what caused that? And they wait for an explanation, always in terms of things that has happened. We know this not to be correct, although you will have to continue to talk this way to make sense to other in our language sphere, which is deterministic in many ways. My personal view here is you don't even have to be exposed to the schooling system. You will get it anyway through the milk of the mother's breast. And then you start making conclusions in existences and happenings. In the second part, I will mention Edward de Bono, who also tried to emphasize this problematic nature in Western thinking for his whole career. But I put a pause here. And we are back after the pause. Edward de Bono, the British mathematician, inventor of lateral thinking, once said that truth is a relation between functions that gives a certain result. What he pointed to was truth as absolute being problematic. Truth is a variety of existence. True propositions are after effects, arguments. It is exactly what the syllogism does. No more, but no less. If we come to expand truth to be eternal, we make a grave mistake. We reify truth and we do not see it as the result after the collapse. According to Edward de Bono, truth is a stopping point in Western thinking. One example recently was a tweet by the British biologist Richard Dawkins. Truth existed before the event of humanity, and it will continue to exist after we are gone. That is a grave mistake, and it destroys the concept of truth, making it an existence, a noun. Not depending on the verb-like observation, the movement of consciousness. This is the standstill of static, idealized truths. That we inherited from antiquity. Within academia today, 90% of professors believe that we can reach something new by rearranging old truths, old collapses. And with these real events, existences, as a tool, we supposedly could make understanding of the future, the superposition. Edward de Bono saw this as an emotional fixation, an attitude, biased, subjective attitude. In the 90s, he wrote an article in The Guardian trying to explain that we are still haunted by the ghosts of ancient thinking. He called that tendency the gang of the three. Few articles have been so highly criticized as that one. The attacks were venomous. Eternal truth is part of our life world. We breathe it, we use it, and we put trust in it. A dangerous misconception, to say the least. It makes science stagnant. And our thinking itself mechanical. As indicated of quantum mechanics, our attitude decides reality. And if our attitude is as stiff, unyielding, static, it will also help create a dead world. Of existences, of real events, and of eternal truths. truths become useful only if put in correct relations. They do not hover about in a transcendental world. According to De Bono, especially clear in the book, I am right, you are wrong. He clarifies that we both lose creativity and a working concept of truth, the usefulness of a syllogism. By confounding before and after, it seems that Edvard de Bono had an intuitive grasp of the severe problems facing understanding quantum mechanics. And especially in the very beginning, when your senses, your intuition is very weak. The line between before and after is very, very thin. But trust me, with training, with stamina, you will learn to tell the difference between before and after. It's absolutely crucial, but it will happen. I will continue with the text of Alan Emrén, where I left off. We were talking about the probability amplitude. With very few exceptions, quantum mechanical wave functions have regions of high probability amplitude. But also regions with very low amplitudes. A 1 second electron in a hydrogen atom has a probability density function given by the equation 6. This function has non-zero values at all distances. An electron belonging to a certain hydrogen atom might be found far from the nucleus of its position, if its position is measured. In numerical quantum mechanical calculations, one normally makes use of a cutoff which means that outcomes with extremely low probabilities are neglected. This does not influence properties like energies, charge densities, etc. in spite of that, the low probability tails are real. And very important in some situations. My comment here, this is a very good example that you can keep the classical world by cutting off the low probability outcomes. There's also practical reasons for doing that. But be aware that doesn't mean reality can only be high probability driven. How easy is it not to confuse those two things? Especially taken as the low probability doesn't have an outcome you can practically use. Most commonly not. An example is the alpha decay of uranium-238. An alpha particle formed in the nucleus may, with extremely low probability, be found outside the Coulomb barrier. Due to the tail of the wave function. For an individual nucleus, this may happen during 1 femtosecond in a time span of 4.5 billion years. Not a big chance, I would say. Nevertheless, Such processes are essential for life on Earth. The probability is beyond belief. And I like his expression. I will repeat it just for the sound of it. For an individual nucleus, this may happen during 1 femtosecond in a time span of 4.5 billion years. Most of the miracles told in the Bible could be described in terms of states with extremely low but non-zero probabilities. Chosen at the right moment. According to the Bible, the extremely low probability may be changed to reality by faith. Thus, by a kind of emotion. Examples thereof are the Virgin Mary being pregnant, Jesus walking on water, or even resurrection from death. None of these is impossible. They are merely events of probability small enough to be considered, and this is important, practically impossible. Practically impossible. For a human in the right emotional state. It might be a question of seeing the desired outcome and choosing the appropriate value of the imaginary time for that outcome to become real.
1 hour and 43.
This is so important. I will repeat it for you to remember. For a human in the right emotional state, it might be a question of seeing the desired outcome and choosing the appropriate value, and listen now, imaginary time for that outcome to become real. This shows for the importance of imaginary, unreal, non-existent time. It might never ever be real, or as indicated in the article, it will be as unlikely as possibly fathom. But it has still an incredible, important factor to play. There is now even a new line of thinking within physics that concentrates on the imaginary, the things that never happened. I would say this is extremely helpful because in layman's terms you can understand the necessity of things that never happened. In constructor theory, which is the name of that line of physics, these are sometimes referred to as counterfactuals. We are using counterfactuals on a daily basis. They are an incredible important part of planning, understanding, learning. but also of creativity. The odd thing, I would say, is that without counterfactuals, nothing could be understood. And still, in classical physics, it is a thing to be despised, treated as an outcast, actively rejected from the equations of the Newtonian paradigm. So although everything is using counterfactuals and they are a participatory ingredient in reality, it is widely rejected, claimed to be a new thing. But still, it sneaks in like an uninvited guest. Imaginary time. We can't do physics without it. But people would be surprised that imaginary time is literally non-existent. And so also the participatory imaginary photons. There would not even be a future without counterfactuals. Everything would be like the hare and the tortoise coming to a standstill. Xenon, and I think Douglas Hofstadter here agrees, made a conclusion from the hare and the tortoise that reality is false. A more correct conclusion would be that something is wrong with our fixation with existences and real happenings. When I encountered Xenon's paradox, my professors were almost of the same view as Xenon. There is something wrong with reality. We ignore those things that pop up, that goes against this thinking. I have, for instance, encountered the incredibly deviating numbers of the terrible terror attack in September. So incredibly much lower. But it gets ignored. It gets pushed to the side. And even today, priests are claiming that miracles are metaphorical. I think it's easy now to see how deeply ingrained this thinking is, when even the clergy is denying what flies in the face of the existence thinking of antiquity. Truth, real, existence, atom, the divisibility of reality, and that the future is the same as the past. Those 5 factors makes for a binding net and knot, a Gordian knot that locks our thinking. Although at times very difficult, Emrén is very clear to pointing to our traditional way of thinking about things and where it goes wrong. Maybe a comment here from my dear colleague.
Speaking of hairs and illusions, I came to think about the rabbit and duck illusion. And let us imagine that we don't have the rabbit against a turtle, but say rabbit against a duck. And how Wittgenstein would explain it, so to say. So it depends, so to say. You have one viewer who thinks that the rabbit won. Second viewer perhaps thinks it was the duck. But is it less real, so to say? Zeno would perhaps say that yes, rabbit would win and the duck would not. No. Zeno would say that the duck would never catch the rabbit because they are small. But Wittgenstein instead focuses on the viewer, and the viewer would, so to say, so in Zeno's word, this rabbit and duck would be completely separated. That is the problem. Instead, in Wittgenstein's analogy, they would be intermingled. Both could win. It depends on the viewer, so to say. So it would be nice to think about this, how Wittgenstein would imagine this. I still don't have any, so to say, final proposal, but let me think about it. But I would like to return to Alan's comments to me. Another comment by Alan. He wrote to me, Bohr, Schrödinger, Heisenberg and Dirac finally arrived at a full Copenhagen interpretation. The cat as an entity does exist only when it's observed. between observations. It is merely a packet of waves developing according to the Schrödinger and Dirac equations. So here the question is, does the cat really exist, dead, alive, or both at the same time? Or is it merely a packet of waves? If it's only merely a packet of waves, is it not blurry? So I don't know. I don't have yet an answer, so I have to think it's a complicated question. Do you want to add something quickly, Hans?
Yes, this video will soon terminate. But yes, I agree. It's interestingly complicated. I've been a person delighted in these complications for decades. It makes me more eager to go deeper. It's a detective story, but it's complicated, and there are so many surfaces underneath each other to make a whole web interconnected. And think, I mentioned 5 tendencies in the traditional thinking. There are possibly much more stemming out from these derivations of existences. And I do like the saying of Augebor, the famous son, also a marvelous scientist, son of Niels Bohr, who said, "Do not see the electrons as existing, not even the atoms." When I grew up to school, I was tricked to see the atom as real. I even had a model to touch the atom, and I could feel the protons, the neutrons, and we saw the electron further away. So it goes to the imaginary conception of a pre-arranged reality that Niels Bohr, the maker of this atom model, was really keenly aware of. It's a trap to fall into, but it is, I would say, like a rabbit hole, to continue the rabbit thinking. Especially in the English countryside. You don't see them if you walk a field, but they will break your leg if you are being too quick in your pace. They are highly dangerous, and they can be deep. So be aware, but we will try to lead you to the fuller, more encompassing understanding. You will feel a certain calm coming about, because I feel these 5 things will make you stressed out in your thinking. It is a little bit like a cat trying to catch its own tail. You will never get to the before, and this will cause turmoil in the thinking corporal system, make you anxious, nervous, facing despair even, like Plato and a lot of the other philosophers. And I can well imagine Zenon found that as well. Thank you very much for your patience, and have a very pleasant morning.
Thank you.